It starts with Israel attacking Iran. The plan is for either Iran or for China to retaliate after Iran is struck with a nuclear weapon. At that point, there will be a limited nuclear exchange in the Middle East, followed by a ceasefire. He heard this being planned in this meeting. This is being choreographed. The idea is that as the world looks upon this with horror, then they will demand from their governments that there are heavy controls over travel, over communication, over people who meet, over people who protest in the streets. And because people will be driven into fear by this, they'll request and demand and insist on heavy controls from their governments, which will be justified. And this is where you're going to kind of get the martial law situation in all the Western countries.
Think quite carefully about the conscription. Think quite carefully about the conscription. Think quite carefully about the conscription.
Say no.
Think quite carefully about the conscription.
They simply say no. And that's what we all should do. Because this will end if we simply say no. here to do today. They simply say no. And that's what we should do. Because this will end if we simply say no. No.
If the white male goes to war, women will be left. Women will be left.
And this is where you're going to kind of get the martial law situation in all the Western countries. And then, he said, then the real war starts.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. On this roasting day, I'm surprised anybody's actually here. We'll be out in the garden having your barbecue or whatever. Anyway, welcome, and interesting one tonight. Very interesting, if you like a bit of history. But more importantly, because, of course, there's a lot of people talking about civil war. So I thought, well, maybe the folks out there need to realise what actually took place before the Civil War, during the Civil War, and the consequences of it, because they control it all. If there's a civil war on the game, they're controlling it already, make no mistake about it. See Tommy Robinson and the likes. So, an exceptionally important study tonight that we're going to go through, leading on to another interesting subject, which came off a series of videos that I found this week, and so I transcribed it and put it on the website. Very interesting indeed, and I titled it Salvation Lies on Rothschild Island. Now, we probably won't get into that tonight, but I'm going to put it up as a link anyway after. But first, what I want to just look at is the fact that Trump has now deployed direct energy weapons into the Gulf, which is interesting because not only has it completely annihilated Iran's strategy, which is to use swarm drones and boats, you know, they don't have time now. The radars don't count. They don't have any time for evasion. These laser weapons are instantaneous. So it's completely and utterly destroyed Iran's capability. But what it's also done is it's fully exposed now the fact that America does have directed energy weapons, which now you can see the cause of all those fires that's been going on in America, specifically California, as they clear out huge swathes of land in order for a new Silicon Valley to be built. Clearly, it weren't forest fires, as they claim, because the forests around the houses, in most cases, weren't ablaze. The houses, specifically, that weren't blue, burnt to a crisp, and the cars were basically melting, or the aluminium on the cars were melting, and any poor folks that were sat in the cars. So that's important, that it's actually, you know, two fronts. It's sort of quashed Iran's capability, but it's also fully now exposed the fact that they do have these direct energy weapons. So any more fires of that nature is, well, they've exposed themselves now, so it's going to be a bit more difficult for them to get away with that. Now, another thing that I noticed this weekend, which was rather worrying, and I did do a video on it a year or so ago. This brown muck that keeps falling out of the sky and just completely covers the car. So all week, Saturday, yesterday, has been cited by the Met Office to be glorious sunshine all day. Unbroken. Which, of course, is what we've had today. Now, I got up Saturday morning, early doors, looked at the Met Office, and it was still saying unbroken sunshine. So that's the Met Office calculations for what was going to be on the Saturday. But as soon as I left the back door to go out for a coffee, I noted the car were absolutely, it had a small rainfall, but the car was covered in this brown stuff. And I just thought, no, this is no coincidence that the Met Office is showing clear, and all of a sudden we've got this taking place on Saturday morning before everybody gets up. And I mean, the ground were actually almost dry, so it had been a brief shower for sure, but enough to cover everything with this brown stuff. So I was very aware of that. I had to put the wipers on before I set off. Went to clear the road, did what I was doing. On my way back, I was parked up at some traffic lights, and it had been bothering me, so it had been on my mind. And there'd been a bit of a spillage on the road on a bend with white chippings, and this wagon came flying up because they obviously were on green, shot round this corner, but in so doing raised a huge white dust cloud off the road, and it just all came in my window, and I'm like, bloody hell. But straight away I just thought, that's why they're doing it. They're doing this before the dry spell, okay, so that the entire area is covered in this brown shit. It has to be pulled down by the rain so it doesn't blow away in the atmosphere. So it's definitely a strategy that they're operating. It has to be rain, it has to be wet, and they deploy this stuff. Not to mention the ticks and everything that they're deploying from these chemtrails. But we're dealing with this particular substance because I did a video on it, but others have done videos on it and showed quite clearly that it's magnetic. There are metals in this brown dust. And it's exactly the same brown dust as it was when I did the video, and the same for everybody else that's doing this video. So it's not a coincidence. This is deliberate. So watching that wagon just throw up all this dust, and I just thought, just before the dry spell, they're deploying this. It's going to dry out. It's going to be all over the place, and vehicles, wind, everything is constantly brushing it up. We're breathing it in. We're breathing that stuff in. Now, why is that important? Well, it's important because we know about these towers. There have been guys recently speak about they know what the next game is, which is to light up everybody's metals inside the body with these towers. But what I found really interesting, and I did put it up on the Facebook, so you might have seen this, but this is poignant stuff because just listen to this.
Testimony isn't unique, it's just the most detailed. There are other accounts, buried in private letters, hidden in journals, scattered across estate sales and forgotten archives. Other survivors who described the same thing. A massive mud event in the early 1800s that buried cities across the Western world. Not just America, Europe, Asia, everywhere. I've tracked down 17 separate written accounts from different survivors across 3 continents, all describing the same event. Same time frame, 1811 to 1816. Same phenomenon, mud appearing from nowhere, burying existing cities, followed by immediate reorganisation and historical revision. These aren't connected sources, these are independent witnesses who had no contact with each other, yet their stories align. In London, a woman named Margaret Cole wrote to her sister in 1823 describing how the old streets of Westminster were buried and rebuilt at a new level. She described the same atmospheric lights, the same metal towers installed before the event, the same officials arriving afterward with new property claims. Her letter was discovered in 2015 in an estate sale. Never published, never acknowledged, just sitting in a box of old correspondence. In St. Petersburg, a Russian engineer named Dmitry Volkov kept a journal throughout 1812. He documented the installation of strange equipment around the city, towers with glass components, officials from elsewhere giving orders to local authorities. Then a mud event in March 1813 that buried the lower city.
Now, I've studied Tartaria, the mud floods, the orphan trains, everything that we know is available out there. And I did this quite some years ago and put 2 posts up on the old website with my findings but also with my thoughts. And one thing that did strike me reading through this mud flood stuff was it sounded to me like there was some method by which either the earth had shook itself to a frequency that just liquefied the earth, just enough for it to... So maybe the soil rose up, or indeed all the hills just shot down. There's also the ideas that it was a flood, and then obviously that's the sediment that's left. But the liquefaction idea really stayed with me as a potential for such an event to take place in cities, you might say, which, you know, like London, there's no hills around London at all. For it to have been a sort of hills coming down and just flooding the streets with it would have had to have been something else. And I found that exceptionally interesting because that's the first time I've come across any information whereby it's been spoken that before these events they were putting strange towers up and strange technology. And we know that they're putting this up all around us, and they have been for quite a number of years. Nobody ever talks about what it is. No engineers, the companies themselves, they never speak of it, they never mention it. We know the councils, because this technology is not underwritten by Lloyds, so there's no insurance, in giving it planning permission puts us, the public, underwriting liability for it. So if anything happens, the councils are going to basically pay, or you're going to pay. So it's all hush-hush. We're seeing this, as I've just explained, with these metals everywhere, and, you know, we do have a bit of knowledge to suggest that they could actually put the right frequency up, and like a microwave oven, if you put aluminium or the metals in it, it reacts. And they're obviously filling us with metals for a reason. We have to accept that. And this delivery from the sky does seem to be one of the main methods of it. Of course, it's in the foods, it's in anything you buy these days, you know that. So they are just obsessed with filling us up with metals. So I just thought I'd share that, because if you haven't seen it on the face ache, that is the first time I have ever seen anything where they're speaking about this tech being raised up, outsiders coming in and dictating terms, so UN, so immigrants operating for UN, telling everybody what to do, rebuilding and reshaping history. Not good, is it? Let's be fair about that. That's absolutely disgusting, because that we know they're more than capable of. Now, what I want to go through now is it's some history, because it's so important that people start to understand. I mean, everybody has an idea of what they think went on, and England's an horrible place, and it's always been a bastard, and it's always picked on the world, etc., etc. But really, you've really got to understand what was going on here to the English under Cromwell, before Cromwell. We've discussed what the Tudors were doing, which was basically destroying the monastic systems, which were the church system which kept all the common land available for use for the common people, as was English law. And in destroying those monasteries, that's what they destroyed. So the fence from stopping them putting fences up and privatising all the land to themselves. Now, I've studied Charles I many times in the past, and it's very difficult to actually find anything outside the scripted game that you get. But one thing he was doing, he was fighting Enclosure. And people go, oh, what's that? We don't really know what that is. Okay, well, we're going to go through that tonight, so you get a full understanding of what that is, what we're going on, who we're playing what, who we're financing who, and then the consequences of the Civil War. Properly. No messing about. Real. And then we're also going to... Well, it actually starts off by applying another take, a deeper take, because I know we've gone through this once, on what Charles was actually doing when he made his speech in Congress. Because when you look at it deeper, the subtle symbolism in it is massive, and I didn't even see it on the first round. So this is so important, but more importantly, they're talking about civil war again everywhere. And you're going to see something that you've never seen before, which will explain why they brought these immigrants here. And you're going to see it and you're going to know what it is. So you're going to know what Tommy Robinson is. And everything that follows him, everything that supports him, everything that backs him, including Nigel Farage, especially Nigel Farage. He's signing off everything to Palantir in a full privatisation of this entire system under the United States, which is still under the IMF, remember. The federal system it's not America. It is the Bank for International Settlements, administrative, executive for the collection of the debt owed by the hoity-toits over the centuries to the usurers, the black nobility, the Venetian party of the North, as they call themselves. Let's put it that way. So I'll just see who's come in, and of course, like I said, I don't expect many to come in tonight, and rightly so. It's a beautiful day, and then we'll crack on. Because if we can, we'll just brisk through the Rothschild. Because again, it's so important. Because if the people really recognised this, especially the Rothschild side, their power comes in their proof of claim to the debts, the agreements and the contracts that have been made in almost 3 centuries. And we all know what happens when you have no proof of claim. No proof of claim, there's no claim. And all the contracts, the agreements, everything is down in the Antarctic. Gold is first, it could even be gold still. But I'm not so sure, given the games they've played in the East and setting everything up in the East. But it's just, the salvation is in blowing the living daylights out of that place or getting in there and removing it all. No proof of claim, there's no claim, there's no debt, and that is exactly what's forced all the 63 nations to be yoked by the United Nations, which is just the administrator for the bankrupt governments. Oh, honestly. And what I've put together this week is a precursor to that, and it's so important, especially because we are now living in the time that our ancestors were living in from the late 1500s, well, mid-1500s, right through to the end of the Civil War. It's exactly the same. And if we can understand what we're actually going on there and the mechanic that we're being employed by the city, you are going to see everything that's playing out today is a carbon copy. It's a carbon copy. Everything that they're doing is a carbon copy of what's been and done and succeeded in the past. Right, and you're going to get to see who these people really are. Right, so who's joined us? So, Kerry says, love from Ireland, evening Sam. Anthony says, evening Sean, friends, moderators, and the wider chat participants on the Sunday evening wise sermon. Evening, Anthony. June says, evening Sean, evening June. Beanbuster says, hey Sean, big ear, hope you're well. Dude, boy of the weeks don't have Simplify by, do they? Not flaming, no, honestly, it's unreal. Slipknot says, alright, Sean, alright, everyone, Trev. The Tackle Bay Tour, says, hey Sean, I hope all's well at the Wise Asylum. Have you read the book Operation Vampire Killer 2000 American Police Action Plan for Stopping World Government Rule? I can't say that I have there, my good man. In truth, if you've got a link, please put it up. BY Music says, good evening all, evening Paul. Paul says, evening Sean and fellow mates, evening Paul. Anthony says, very informative over Rothschild, Antarctic, Paul Sean. I thought so, Anthony. I thought so, absolutely. Because if you look at the game that they've played on Antarctica, how have they masked what's really Antarctica's really been about? And we're talking 1818 here when they started to build this library of all the records. 1818, that's a hell of a long time ago. And look at the fantasies that have been conjured from the cauldron. Aliens, fucking all this malarkey to cover what's basically just a bunch of Johnny-come-latelys or the trustees for the fondy set up by the Venetian banking families for all the records of all the contracts. Look at the nonsense that's been played out in the last 200 years to cover that And has everybody fallen for it? Damn right they have. And do they still fall for it? Damn right they do. And Admiral Byrd, in my opinion, was probably the last move on that phrase, on that method, to just confound and confuse, to obfuscate the fact that basically it's just the Rothschilds down there holding all the records for the proof of claim. I mean, anytime any government or country decides, blah, 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 out comes the record. There you go. Your great-great-great-great-grandmother signed it and said, I owe you. They've transferred it to you because you're persons. You're paying. Your government's paying it because you will obey your government. It's exceptionally important, is that document. Absolutely important. That's why I had to put it on the website. I just had to. Very odd to hear. Oh, sorry, guys. I probably need to get a little bit closer. Fix me mic with the stuff they made it. Yeah, 1969 moon landing. Yeah, you might be right there. Sorry, chaps. I will come a bit closer. I need to get a new stand for it, actually, because it's that's the problem. Usually I can have it just stuck where it needs to be, but it won't hold itself in that position anymore. Cheap muck. 100 quid, though. That's not fucking cheap muck, is it? But anyway, suffice to say, it's time to get a new one. Slipknot says, not just metals, self-assembly nanotech. Well, of course, it's all nanotech, isn't it? Everything that they're doing is nanotech, so it has a function as well. But I'm still of the mind, it's the people that danced to the juice on the bug script that are really going to come a cropper when this game moves forward. Or, as we discussed on a hypothetical thing, using in the art of war doctrine, if we were to protest properly, and I mean properly, you would have to completely and utterly close down all the police stations, so you blocked them in. Nobody can get out, nobody can get in. And dismantle in the day all the CCTV, all the plate recognition systems, to completely dismantle the power that they really have for law enforcement. And then we could get into it properly. But until people are ready to do such, it is hypothetical. The art of war is not for the profane, nor is it for the coward. It's a real solid method of doing war, and that's the way it should be. So of course that's hypothetical, but that's the only game we would have to consider if that was the real rebellion that was to take place on this land. And then you could deal with everything else after, without the intrusion of all this nonsense that they depend on, so they don't have to get out their little police cars. Where are we there? Evening, Sean, says Paul. Yeah, evening, yeah, where are we? Okay, I think I've done that. So yeah, metal self-assembly nanotech, absolutely. Franz Booton says hello, good evening, and hope you're all well. Evening to you, Francis. Happy Campers YC4's evening all. Evening to you, Happy Camper. And Jim Drinsky says evening, Sean, and all. Right. You're going to like this. This is dynamite. If you like history, you're going to love this. But also, I mean, we've discussed this subject matter in depth on many occasions, but not like this. We haven't. Not like this. So get ready to learn something that you've never heard before. Now then, I might have to do a little bit of alterations, actually. Because yeah, here we go. I'm going to have to just... Sorry guys, just fettle this a little bit. Because obviously I had it set up for faceache. Because I've noticed sometimes on faceache it's showing everybody who's on, and I don't think that's fair. Because nobody has asked to be put all over YouTube because they're on my faceache. So, oh wait a minute, no, I'm doing this wrong. I have to make it bigger. Silly boy. The King Has No Clothes, a historical study from Charles I to Charles III. Okay, is the title of the gig. Right. I'm going to have to put my gigs on, I'm afraid. Okay. Right, so I put this up today. I've been working on this in the week. And it's quite lengthy, but it's... you'll be glad it's lengthy because there's a lot of data. So Tuesday the 28th of April 2026, a king called Charles gave a speech to Congress in the United States. Included in that speech was the following. You recently commented, Mr. President, that if it was not for the United States, European countries would be speaking German. Dare I say that if it wasn't for us, you would be speaking French. The King of England is unelected, he's hereditary and constitutionally decorative. He has flown to Washington to tell the US Congress that power should face checks and balances. What Charles actually said was, the US Supreme Court Historical Society has calculated that the Magna Carta is cited in at least 160 Supreme Court cases since 1789, not least as the foundation of the principle that executive power is subject to checks and balances. Distinguished members of the 119th Congress, it is here in these very halls that the spirit of liberty is present in every session, and every vote cast not by the will of one, but by the deliberation of many. This is the point the Democrats stand and offer a cheering ovation, specifically the Democrats. The attendant media claimed the room erupted, and if you watch the speech, you could hear it yourself. Why the Democrats? Where are we there? Charles citing the Magna Carta as the tradition he embodies, which he did make clear that he embodies the Magna Carta and it's as a tradition. Interesting. In the US, they had what they call No Kings protests, and they also cited the Magna Carta. This is the No Kings protesters, which of course is the same tradition that Charles embodies, according to Charles. In essence, what we had is a king citing the checks on his own power to an audience whose ancestors, and therefore by tradition, had revolted against his crown, and yet the Congress erupted in great cheer. Are we missing something very subtle here? The nation that broke from the crown 250 years ago required the King of England to remind them of their founding principles, which, of course, on America, they call democracy. But in fact, America, true, is a constitutional republic, in the same way England is a constitutional monarchy. King Charles III is not the King of England. He is the King of the UK Corporation. So what is playing out here? The US media cited his speech as a subtle warning to America, and while the Democrats cheered, Trump's face said it all. There you go. That's Trump on as he said that. I mean, if you've seen the speech, you've seen it. Now, before his visit, the Council on Foreign Relations, which is a branch of the Royal Institute for International Affairs, or RIIA, posed an open question. Would a royal visit salvage the unravelling of the UK-US special relationship? In Charles's speech, he was making it very clear that it would take what it would take to salvage the relationship. This is why the Democrats stood, cheered and clapped. But this is when we saw the face of a usury puppet. So that's Donald the Trumpet. Subtle is not the word when it comes to comprehending the speech, and so we must look at history for the context and position of King Charles III's speech, not from the perspective of Robert Maxwell's education literature that the Americans have been subject to for decades, but the real history of usury, king, parliament, and the inner city of London. Because that's another thing people don't realise. The Epstein network, which of course is, or was Robert Maxwell's network, they're the publicators of all the books that the Americans have been educated from since the 70s. The first King Charles, so Charles I, was born in 1600 and was the second son of James I. He inherited the throne in 1603. Now, this is the king who lost his head due to the civil unrest that would conclude in the English Civil War. The shift in what Parliament was and the power of an independent and creditor to the new model army and a new Parliament. The civil unrest was a direct consequence of enclosure, a system whereby the landed gentry consistently encroached upon the common land, dug trench and erected fences to prevent the common folk from using the centuries-old tradition of land in common for the common use, which is what the monastery system, which is the church, kept intact. And of course, the monasteries were only finalised in the destruction by Henry VIII. They'd been being attacked for quite a long time before that. Let us not forget that with the installation of the Tudors, the Holy See families through the House Pallavicini, via its puppet house, the House Stanley, or the Earls of Derby, had removed the Plantagenets and installed a strange house with no real factual evidence of lineage. Tied to the House of York by marriage, Henry Tudor would become Henry VII. It's Henry Tudor that's not a very factual lineage. The kicker is the fact that he married Margaret York or Elizabeth of York, I can't remember. His firstborn was Arthur, which referenced Henry's fixation on all things Arthurian legend, the very hero awaited by the natives to unravel all that had been carried out since the 1066 invasion and mass murder. Arthur died, not without mystery, and next in line was a dark-skinned upstart who would be installed as Henry VIII. Big changes would take place under this monarch, big bureaucracy, more taxation, and the acceptance of the murder of a wife, not befitting the king's will. Monasteries removed and all power shifted to finance and government. We then get queens and finally a Scottish bloodline that would secure the Scottish and therefore Roman creed over the land of England. The installation of the Whigs in London and a clear subversion of the English constitutional monarchy was begun. This is where we now have the first Charles on the throne, and the main thrust of our exploration of the true history of the 1600s on England. You're going to love this, chaps. The first record of protests against enclosures is found in 1480. After 1530, such protests became more and more frequent. During the 16th century, which is the 1500s, the century under the Tudors, most of England was fenced off, common law had been stifled through the subversion of the monastic system that enshrined the common law and all its freedoms. In essence, that was the original theology afforded to Rome, but as we now know, Rome itself was suffering a real subversion by the money masters from Venice. Made so in the fact Rome had allowed the Venetian black nobility into its halls to fight the Germanic Hohenstaufens, or the Holy Roman Empire. So when the Vatican fell out with the Holy Roman Empire in the 1300s, 1200s, 1300s, the big mistake they made was bringing in the black nobility to fight the Hohenstaufens, which were the Germanic boys that held the Holy Roman Empire of Charlemagne. Okay, so it was the Vatican falling out with them guys that actually undermined the Vatican itself by allowing these usurers in to fight on their behalf. Okay? I mean, it all makes sense, you know. As soon as you shift off your own bloody tradition, you're fucked. You know, the spiritual protection for whatever it is that's agreed between man and the heavens is void. The protection is no longer there. So the Vatican itself shot itself in the foot, and then everything else was dismantled from that point. But here we had this problem with Enclosure. The Venetians conquered Rome by having the church divide itself from the military branch, which was the Holy Roman Empire. Then a carve-up of its dominions could take place. Okay? So they wrote it on themselves. Under Enclosure, common land was converted to private property. Now, not unlike the current method of pulling swathes of land into trust. As an example, the National Trust. How much land have they robbed off the people, thrust it into a trust that they control, and then tell you what you can and can't do? That's National Trust. All the heritage shit. That's what it is. So it's a rebranding of Enclosure for today. Same thing. It's always about land. The people's rights and freedoms were stripped as the land was enclosed. The monasteries dissolved, and therefore no power structure left to secure those rights and freedoms. Okay? In July of 1549, Robert Ketz led the men of Norfolk. Now, this is 2 years after Henry VIII has died, by the way. Robert Ketz led the men of Norfolk to rebellion against the policies of Edward Seymour, 1st Duke of Somerset and Lord Protector. This came 2 years after the death of Henry VIII, who reigned from 1509 to 1557. Ketz led a move in which his men filled the ditches and tore down the enclosure fences. They defeated the royal army sent to suppress them, and so the crown sent a larger force, get this, that included German mercenaries. What is the crown doing today? It's brought in its foreign force, hidden slightly because it's United Nations. All these fucking immigrants. Right? So they were filling all these ditches and tearing down the fences and pulling up the hedges, basically, these guys. So that's in 1559. Now, 58 years later, we get to the summer of 1607. England is in complete revolt. So it's gone for 58 years, this revolt. This is how long the English were revolting against this enclosure. 58 years later, we were in complete revolt. So it moved from Norfolk to the Midlands, and specifically in Hasselbeck. Okay? Obviously, I'll put this up after. All these links are there for you to check. Now, the revolt spread to Northamptonshire, Warwickshire and Leicestershire, and on from there. They ripped down the fences, pulled the hedges and filled the ditches. This is where the term leveller was born. The people who levelled the enclosure ditches. The people who were dispossessed did not disappear. So all these people didn't go away from the beginnings of it in 1549. Well, in 14 odd, as we just saw. But it really started to pick up as soon as Henry'd gone. Alright? The people who were dispossessed did not disappear. Now get this. Many of them were sent into colonial ships. This is Englishmen. During the 17th century, so the 1600s, so you've got Charles on. Yeah. James is gone, you've got Charles on, and then all the trouble starts. 210,000 Englishmen went to the Caribbean. And 130,000 Englishmen were sent to Virginia. Many of them arrived as indentured servants. The peak of this forced emigration period is 1630 to 1660, right when the Civil War is going strong. So we are speaking in terms of the English Civil War generation. So the generation that revolted, which today would be Gen X, you might say. Not the baby boomers and not the youngsters, because they don't seem to have this kind of grammar to reference. So we would be classed, if Civil War kicked off now, as that Civil War generation. What plans would they have, I do declare? Well, none if we do it correctly. Some of the emigres did go voluntarily, but the vast majority did not. The gangs of kidnappers were known as spirits, who supplied the merchants with servants by luring or, in most cases, forcing people aboard the ships. The term spirited away comes from the English accounts of these middlemen who would spirit away captives for the Atlantic trade. So we're dealing with the East India companies, are we not? Now, this guy is very key to this slavery, plantations, monopoly on behalf of the city, which of course is the East India Company. Maurice Thompson was a major tobacco trader and slaver who had emigrated to Virginia. He was a Puritan or Presbyterian, which is all this Scottish shit, But of course, as they do, he's presented as an Englishman. The clue is in his mother's line. So if you check out that, you'll see what I mean. Okay, the clue's there for you to see. All this shit comes out of Scotland. All of it. It's all Venetian Whig shit show. Solomon's. All of it. Thompson was the pioneer of the slave plantations in the Caribbean and obtained a monopoly of the Virginian trade on behalf of the East India Company, operating out of the City of London liveries. His business interests include West African slave trading, New England's provisioning, silver prospecting in Panama, and raids into Venezuela. He and his associates were the people in charge of Parliament's war financing from 1642 onward. So this guy, Maurice Thompson, and his associates, they were in charge 100% in financing the new model army. Okay? And we know where they were coming from, the Dutch. Alright, so the Dutch East India was still in control here. And it didn't complete its move fully until after the Civil War, as we've discussed many times. In September of 1640, he delivered, this is Thompson, a mass London petition to Charles I, demanding Parliament's recall. 3 of the 4 MPs elected to London constituencies in the Long Parliament of 1640 had direct links to Thompson's merchant networks. December 1640, these city radicals ran a campaign to abolish bishops. Because, of course, even though we had the Church of England, they were still in sync with Christian Church, and they were a problem for enclosure. They were a problem for getting rid of the constitutional monarchy. So the bishops were a problem. And as I said to you before, in the 90s, as a shock to me, I realised that it was the 27 bishops that were the problem for a lot of this crap that were being shoved in since the Second World War. Which is why Blair came in and removed the power and put in all his own. Now, at the moment, I've got a piece going where it shows these lords that are compromised by the Epstein network. It would be interesting to see if they actually were put in by Blair. So did Blair actually put in compromised lords specifically so that they do exactly what they were told? That remains to be seen. I haven't got with that yet. So, a campaign to abolish bishops, okay? By the spring of 1641, they were controlling the flow of loans to Parliament. So this network was deciding what Parliament could or couldn't do because they were its creditors. This is Parliament. So the inner city of London, the East India Companies, had full control over this Parliament, the House of Commons, because that's where it was getting its lolly from. Because, of course, the king wasn't giving it any. They were fighting the king to prevent him from being able to tax, to being able to run our courts, and to be and running the navy, the army, and we didn't really have an air force, unless those Hindenburgs were about. Then I don't know. Right. They were by 1641 they were controlling the flow of loans to Parliament. 1641, yeah. In April 1641, they pushed through a law with the clause that banned Charles I from dissolving Parliament without its consent. So there you can see this Parliament has claimed sovereignty already, backed by this private racketeering East India Company, black nobility Venetian bankers, who had left Venice, gone to Holland, because they really wanted to come here. By the winter of 1642, Ireland is in rebellion, and the political situation on England is reaching a flashpoint. On the 4th of January 1642, the following city traders, so John Falk, merchant organised petition campaigns, militia networks, crown mobilisation, see Tommy Robinson. Obviously, he's not as high level as this guy, but he's rallying the mob. You get it? And everybody that follows him. They're rallying a mob that ultimately the inner city will control. This is why Elon Musk's backing it. This is why Trump backs it. Your billionaires are backing it. The billionaire fronts for the city. So they're not backing Tommy Robinson because they're bothered about the grooming gangs. They're not backing Tommy Robinson because they feel sad and sorry at the fact that what their representatives brought in all these immigrants to act as a mercenary force if need be. And I'm talking about the immigrants in the last 10 years, not so much the guys that have been here for 70 years. But, whether you turn that way or not is entirely onto you guys. And I'm very aware that that can take place. I'm very aware of it, okay? As we all should be. Same situation. So John Falk was the man who was organising the militias and the Crown mobilisation. Now, as I said before, Tommy Robinson, before he came out of prison, were on my Facebook. I put a piece up for him to see, papped himself. The day after, he'd never come back, but who were on? David de Rothschild from France, married to Aldo Brandini. And he were on my Facebook for about 3 weeks, every day. There is your John Falk of the day. Okay? I would suggest. A guy called Isaac Pennington, MP for London, Coleman Street radical, becoming Lord Mayor in 1642, and a member of Cromwell's government. Maurice Thompson, who we've discussed, colonial merchant, slaver, tobacco and sugar monopolies. Thomas Andrews, a city financier, and later, when they abolished the Mayor of London, the first Common Council Lord Mayor. Samuel Moyer, colonial trader, Thompson associate. Now we know that 96% of all the slavers, plantation owners, shippers were Jewish. A fact. So this is what we're looking at here. George Thompson, who was Morris's brother. Now I struggled to find this guy. He's not being presented very easily on old Wikipedia. I had to do some sneaking about to find it, but I did find a piece on Wikipedia. And what I noticed as well with these gentlemen, when you go to the Wikipedia, not only have you got the link that you can see there, there was a shed load of garbage attached to it. So I got rid of that, and it got to it straight. So they've been obfuscating at Wikipedia these gentlemen here. Maybe on sending links around. Right. Now, together, they set up the City of London's Committee on Public Safety. Now, not the Parliamentary Committee of July 1642. Okay? And what they set up was a city body created by the Common Council on the same day that King Charles I had walked into the Commons to arrest 5 members. Now, these are the 5 members that were causing havoc for this bunch. The 5 were John Hampden, Arthur Hasselrig, Denzil Hollis, John Pym, and William Strode. And you can hit them links to get a picture of who them guys were. And there is a link to the page where I picked those 5 members up. Now, this was the very reason that the English Civil War broke out. The oligarchic constitution of the city was thus created. Okay, so they created a constitution, and it was being pulled out by the Common Council. Right? Remember, Cromwell created a Commonwealth of Parliament. So what they created here on England is what they replicated throughout the Commonwealth then, and what would be built through the colonisation. The oligarchic constitution of the city was thus created. The Mayor of London was replaced, and the cry that London had saved Parliament was sounded. So they took it over, the entire gig, the King, everything, and then had the audacity to claim that they'd actually saved Parliament. When in fact they took it over because they were financing it. They couldn't do anything without them. And the last bastion to stop that was the bishops and Charles I. A bit like how they play the Holocaust. They want one, but they keep pushing it on everybody and people believe it. So people believed that they'd saved Parliament, the city. They'd saved Parliament. God. Will we ever learn? Is my... until we learn to take this on board and act on it and not, he said, she said, and, I just don't know, carries on. How the hell can anybody expect anything to change, for goodness sake? It's not going to change, is it? Now, war officially breaks out on August in 1642. But before the first battle, Thompson and his associates had already launched a plunder expedition into Ireland and a naval rampage through the Spanish Caribbean. So the East India Company were on the game. It were completely taking over the Spanish colonies and its power, having done so through Elizabeth I by robbing the silver and gold coming out of South America. So this were the getting to the final acts of becoming the new power over and above Spain on behalf of the Venetians. Now, once the fighting began on England, Thompson's network took full control of Parliament's finances and the naval machinery. So straight away, as war breaks out, a slaver, a plantation owner, big in the US, is controlling the naval machinery. British Navy, East India Company. A slaver, okay? And we get blamed for this. England. Can you see the word wizardry that they've implanted, these academics in everything, is quite ridiculous. The Levellers were getting organised and demanding universal suffrage. So this is, war's kicking off. It's still the Levellers that are kicking it. Normal people wanting back what they had, like we do today, like Rupert Law is speaking, because he's speaking it now. Yeah, but give him benefit of doubt for now, and let's see, But I very much doubt it, let's put it that way. How can he possibly go against the very machine that he's took an oath to? He can't, without its permission, so that's controlled opposition. We're way beyond that wizardry, aren't we, here at the Wise Asylum, let's be fair. So the Levellers were getting organised and demanding universal suffrage. They wanted equality before the law, freedom of religion, except for Catholics, and an end to conscription. Because, of course, they would have just seen all this as Catholic stuff coming through, not realising that the Holy See had took over the Catholic system, especially so by removing the monasteries. But Reformation's on and everybody's divided. They're bound to see that, aren't they? Because they believe that the only reason that they've kept out of that is because they broke from Rome, which is actually probably the reason why it got this far. Because there were no major power once the monasteries were gone to actually block it. But we're in the same position now with the US. We'll get to that in a minute. Freedom of religion except for Catholics, and an end to conscription. An agreement of the people was a series of manifestos published between 1647 and 1649 for constitutional changes to the English state, said to be the first fully written English constitution, and is said to be the works upon which the American Constitution was based. So Magna Carta, yes, but more importantly, it was the Constitution offered in these manifestos that is seen as the first and only written full English Constitution, then taken on by Americans. And there's a link. It was subsequently overturned by the new model army for the private city of London with its heads of proposals. So they formed something called the heads of proposals to counteract the agreement of the people. And of course now you can see that the new model army is of course a mercenary force of the city of London. Right, that's how far back this goes. Right, now Parliament's creditors wanted order in the city, Venetians. not a constitution written by the people. Cromwell's armies were paid with city loans. He owed the creditors, and one of the first things he did was shut down the assemblies in Putney and had produced the constitution known as the Agreement of the People, with full military force. So Cromwell wasn't against the king, he was against the English people, the right to law, the right not to be conscripted, and the freedom of religion. That's what Oliver Cromwell was murdering. So this fantasy that Protestants have, that Cromwell were operating against Rome, is utter dog shit. The Whigs are in here. The Whigs are in full control. It's the Venetian side of Rome that got into Scotland that's now running this reformation. And bearing in mind the Jesuits claim to have put futurism in it, knowing full well they'd come back. He then purged the army of all radicals. So the new model army was purged of all radicals and reassured London financiers that his new model army would fight for Parliament's credit, not democracy, and especially not any form of monarchy. So the new model army was about completely dismantling and destroying England. Charles I was executed on the 30th of January 1649, or was it? The High Court of Justice that tried him said that he tried to uphold an unlimited and tyrannical power, to rule according to his will and to overthrow the rights and liberties of the people. And for that he is guilty of treason, which, etymologically, is a breach of trust. So treason is a breach of trust. So when you go back to monarch and sovereignty, anybody that moves against that has breached the trust that the monarch, the office of monarch, has with the people. This is when the monarchy operated, of course. That's what treason is. Breach of trust. Rights and liberties. Rights and liberty. Now, this is a political rhetoric straight from Parliament and its creditors, because it were all freedoms on England. Rights it was, but freedoms the main. Where are we? Sorry, I've got lost it. What they wanted was no taxation. This is what the city wanted. Because while the monarch was in power, he controlled taxation. He controlled the navy and any militia and such that we had, etc. Okay? So what this was about, in the main, was they didn't like somebody else controlling taxation. Because they wanted to base themselves here permanently, they couldn't have a Johnny-come-lately, called a king, deciding at whim to tax this huge mammoth of commerce that wanted to make base on England, because he would have become so wealthy. You know what I'm saying? So it had to be. They couldn't move here without that being carried out. So they wanted no taxation without parliamentary consent, or in reality, their own consent. And that no king could ever smash their securities to interrupt their trading. Of course, there are more reasons as to why he lost his head, but that is the core financial deal. So that's what Oliver Cromwell was being funded to do. After 10 years of Cromwell, the man who cancelled Christmas, banned the pub, banned dancing, and all things called fun, a move was birthing amongst the people to restore the king, meaning the kingship. Okay, so they'd had enough of this Parliament crap. They'd had enough of the Puritan Presbyterians. They'd had enough of the haggis squeezers, basically. They were not haggis squeezers. They were all came through Belgium under David I. We've discussed this. The Restoration of 1660 did not reverse what had been done. The office of monarch had been abolished. We've discussed this. All power was in the hands of the city, who had its puppet parliament. Scotland was the only nation left. England had no parliament, and no common rights. Everything became a privilege under licence from the Parliament. In fact, nothing relating to power would change the so-called Restoration. So the Restoration changed nothing that had been achieved by the city and its now Parliament. Cromwell's Republic was a military tax state that was running huge deficits to the city to keep itself alive and in motion. Cromwell paid for this with yet more land confiscation. Of course, that could not sustain itself under normal politics because people did not like high taxation. This is why a growing public hunger for a restoration of what was to supplant hunger for a restoration of what was to supplant what at that time was or is. So basically, they wanted to get rid of what had become under Cromwell with what they knew from before, which is constitutional monarchy. I've written that a bit funny. I need to double check this because I just put it together today, then I always undo. Anyway. Upon the Restoration, people were delighted at the fact street parties were hard and great celebration. Christmas was back, the pubs all reopened, and laughter was welcome. Method of convalescing from the trauma. But as is the same today, people only understand the outer paradigm of how things work. They fail to ever see the inner workings of the financial elite and always fall into line behind the shills and parrots offered up by the same elites. Tommy fucking Robinson, Elon Musk, Donald Trump. Everybody that backs Tommy Robinson. Can you see why they get all the views, why they don't get contained on the line, and people like me get contained? They remove my views, they change everything to make it look like nobody gives a shit about reality. That's the game. Not that it matters to me, it doesn't. I expect it. Where are we there? This is how they control the opposition. Crumbs set loose for the public to follow. Those who do speak the truth are marginalised through insidious labels. The hapless mob only eager to lay siege against the very minds who do have their interests at heart. So that's how it plays out. The people that actually do want to change things for their better, they get the shit thrown at them. And it doesn't matter to me because I really don't care, like I've said. But it's a sad state of affairs. Because if people could see through that, this whole shit show wouldn't work. Under Charles I, the king could override Parliament. He could tax by royal prerogative. He had control over the courts and command of the army and navy. Charles II, so that's Charles I. Charles I, that's what the king could do. Now we get Charles II after all the trauma. Charles II had been castrated. He can do nothing about tax or parliament and has no power over the army and navy. He can do nothing without the explicit command of parliament, which, and to cap it off, and to show the truth of the matter, he is no longer allowed to step a foot in the city of London without explicit permission from the kings of finance, the Venetian black nobility bankers. Everybody knows the Queen can't enter the city. They're not, they're all that malarkey. That's why. It had been castrated. The power of the monarch was castrated back then. Since that time, the monarch has played a role. King Charles III plays his role, as did all the monarchs before him, back to the death of King Charles I. They play the rational voice of reason. They get to keep the titles, the ceremony, the palaces and the duchies. In return, the city or empire gets a face. A relatable face. One that presents the face of sanity. You can do Christmas, you can go to the pub, you can have justice. It has royal weddings and princes and princesses, but the truth of the matter is very different. Like his mother before him, who told you exactly how it is, and I made a video. There you have Queen Elizabeth II telling you what she can't give you. missed. It's that missing the tricks that's the problem. Not the government, they do what they do. Not the crime, it does what it does. Not the inner city, it does what it does. The fact that you guys do not see through the wizardry is the problem. And when it's put before most people, they don't want to hear it. As I know well, and have faced for God knows how many years. Not so much these days, but back in the day, because of course I don't waste my time with lunatics. Back in the day, when you think you have to, you have to evangelize this stuff everywhere, my God, the people will give you some grief. Right. Now, the king has no clause, says I. Parliament controls justice, the tax and your privileges, and the city controls the parliament's credit. So who's in control here? Parliament has a national debt, and you are the unsecured creditors, made so through the 1933 bankruptcy declarations and the removal of gold-backed currency. Your twin is the liable entity. It is the younger twin at that, all you Bible people. Your younger twin is the liable agency in relation to you being dragged in as an unsecured creditor to this shit show. Well, you're actually secured because they can take everything you've got, but only if you come out the private into the public. We're not going to go through that because you guys know the crack. Your birth certificate is the evidence on the record, and it is that became licensed to act in commerce under the light of the city. Charles II, in the rare breaks taken from shagging every female that would sire his offspring, forming the new model aristocracy, who just happened to be tied to the Medici. Charles II was just a shagger. The majority of aristocracy on England today are bastard lines from Charles I. We've gone through this. So you've had the new model army. Charles shagged the new model aristocracy. He would bargain with the House of Commons because the City of London's credit markets had become indispensable to him. So he was buggered. Now, by 1694, the Bank of England has been established to fund the national debt. The monarch, now the rational arbitrator, his authority is to recast to an ability to provide rational judgment as opposed to holding raw power. So his authority has been shifted completely. All he can do is offer rational judgment, as long as the city tells him he can say it. So when Charles are over there in Congress, as we'll get to in a bit, he was speaking on behalf of the city. In the character of Elizabeth II, the city had its perfected front. She was a good one. She played it well. She played the role to perfection. Always presented as the font of civility, the ever-patient queen watching over the nation. But it takes only a peek at the contracts made and the agreements signed during her reign to see the only constitution being upheld was that of the city. And in the 70s, there were a lot of hoo-ha about her not being able to sign us into Europe. But she weren't in charge. The city was. That's why I took her to court. I wanted everybody to see that their oaths were void. So in Charles III, we have a quandary to consider. In his speech to the US Congress, he began with this statement. We meet in times of great uncertainty, in times of conflict from Europe to the Middle East, which pose immense challenges for the international community. Now, he was subtly presenting the fact that this instability, in part, was a cause of US policy, was the cause by US policy, especially through Trump's first term, in which Trump consistently threatened to leave NATO. This has the effect of bolstering the enemies of Europe into rash decisions I would cite Russia attacking the Ukraine and the empowering of the terrorist groups backed by Iran. Because Hezbollah and all these shit pillocks did start to get excited over there in the Middle East. As much as everybody decries Israel and what it does, there was a big rise in Islamist terrorism. Not just in Israel, but across the Arab states as well. Let's just have a look at this just before we... Now, approximately 85% of the world's refugees are Muslims. But for some reason, they don't seek asylum in over 50 Muslim countries. They only want to go to non-Muslim countries. Any ideas why? That's a fact. Because they're being played by the empire. But they're too stupid to see it. That's not my problem. Well, it could be a problem, but it's not my fault. If they don't want to see that, that's on them. Now, he continued. We meet too in the aftermath of the incident not far from this great building that sought to harm the leadership of your nation. Let me say that such acts of violence will never succeed. And that was obviously a clear reference to January 6th event. So we're dealing here with a huge symbolism, albeit very subtle, that to use violence to make change domestically will not succeed. Now, the Democrats were quite insistent that Trump's gang were behind that. So, basically, Charles is saying, look, this alliance that we've got going is not going to work if you let this lunatic start fucking around like a fucking child, undoing everything. Because his backers, Israel, wants him to do that. Trump's fleecing America, by the way, but working in sync with all this shit show anyway. But if the Americans believe that Trump's on their side, and not only is he ready to fight, but he's pulling away from England or UK, which is garbage. Most of what England went to the United States in the 1800s, and especially after the First World War, and during to get America into the wars. The patents, everything, land, all the bases all across the world, they got 99-year leases. You know, America took over the British Empire in those times just to keep us from starving to death. And that, another, the way that the Federal Reserve System after 1913 dealt with England was fucking horrendous. We were starving, and they had to bend over backwards just to get food, goods from America. So America, under the Federal Reserve, were no friend to England. No friend at all. And maybe I'll put that together to show you exactly the demands of this Federal Reserve System once it had shifted to America over the government, in order that we could eat and fight in the war. Ridiculous, honestly. You'd be disgraced. And I think even Americans would be disgraced if they actually saw what the Federal Reserve System actually did and dealt with England when it were in its time of need. Twice! First World War, Second World War. So, I'd cite Russia attacking Ukraine and the empowering of the terrorist groups backed by Iran. Now, he continued, we meet too in the aftermath of the incident I've done that. Right, okay. Sorry, he continued. It is extraordinary to think that I am the 19th of our line of sovereigns to study with daily attention the affairs of America. Now, that word study in this context is rather interesting. So using the term study translates to keeping an eye on what you're doing. More in line with how you study a threat. Not, oh, lovely, we love what you're doing and we're following suit. We study. It's a different context. And now he continued, the very principle on which your Congress was founded no taxation without representation, was once a fundamental disagreement between us. At the same time, a shared democratic value which you inherited from us. So he's basically saying, even though you inherited your rights to freedom, we were still holding on to this taxation ability from the city. But yet America weren't having that. So even though they disagreed, the fundamentals of what was England was still being taken on by the burgeoning America. So that's a recognition of the fact that we were the bastion of the freedom, and the elites here, is line included, were at odds with the taxation without representation. A direct hint, I says, at the fact we mothered you well, is basically saying, but you completed what we did not. But keep your pit bull in check if the alliance is to continue. Meaning Trump. He continued. Today, thousands of US personnel, defence officials and their families are stationed in the United Kingdom. As British personnel serve with equal pride across 30 American states, we are building F-35s together. A subtle hint at how they are working together on a project going against British popular opinion. Due to the fact Britain gets a share of the technology, so long as the US Air Force standards are applied to the Royal Air Force. So they're privatising our Air Force for a little bit of tech. Crumbs off the fucking table. Okay? He continued. And we have agreed the most ambitious submarine program in history. AUKUS, cited as, which is, translates as Australia, United Kingdom, United States. AUKUS. Now so this is a clear admission that all things UK and Australia are becoming a subdivision of the United States, fully dependent upon the US for all military needs. This began with the rental of the submarine nuclear capacities which the UK rents from the US. We build the subs, but the missile systems are American, and we rent it. And I was told that back in 1987 in the Parachute Regiment. Nuclear and biological warfare. Okay? I was shocked. Couldn't fucking believe what we were hearing. And so was everybody else. In essence, our infrastructure is being completely privatised by the city, who, by the way, fully control the United States of America Incorporated. This can also be seen in the fact the entire Federal Reserve System is but at administration level for the Bank for International Settlements, headed in Basel, Switzerland. And I've offered a link up now to my site. He continued. Our governments are concluding new economic and technology agreements to write the next chapter of our joint prosperity and ensure the British and American ingenuity continues to lead the world. Our nations are combining talent and resources in the technologies of tomorrow, in AI and drug discovery. This is the point at which the use of the Magna Carta flips, you might say, because he started off with Magna Carta into the right to build the digital database system because we share the same system of law. So that's a bit of a twist on the Magna Carta. Now, so far we have discussed the military side of this privatisation and integration, which is what Charles' speech was about. Trump, you're fucking it up. Stop threatening NATO. You're screwing the whole gig up. But what else is going on in the background, and has been since Trump were in on the first session? He signed, through Optus, the NHS over to America. Boris did that. I have reports on my website from that time. So this is now the military being privatised under America. The privatisation of the NHS and everything else, which means all your data is going into Palantir, which is a surveillance system, military surveillance system. Your schools are signing up to these corporate entities through the councils to share the data of your offspring with the councils, who then share it with Palantir and other companies tied into the Palantir system. Our place and medical data is being signed away as we speak. Even under the biggest deception, Nigel Farage, he's signing everything off like you wouldn't believe, that guy. He's a fraud of immense proportions. And I don't even think members of his organisation realise that. Well, you better. You better, and they know you're going to do, which is why you've got Rupert Law. You're 10 steps ahead if you can't see through the shit. You know? Palantir is a surveillance company seeded with CIA money that in 2025 signed a strategic partnership with the UK Ministry of Defence. So if they want conscription, chaps, you're under America, which is under Israel. That's who you're fighting for. Not your nation, not your wife, your children, your offspring. Because if you do go, you get conscripted, your wife, your mother, your offspring are going to be left to these subcultures that are pouring in with the most degraded characters you could imagine. It's ridiculous. And to bolster this, especially Rupert Law, all of a sudden, this grooming gang stuff's on the table, people are being jailed. And Rupert Law's job is to show that he is undermining all this, when, in fact, he's just playing a role. So, the speech in it as a whole was Charles, on behalf of the city, reminding the US Congress that the strong man was breaking the alliance, the trumpet. But he's not. He's actually not. This is for public consumption. All of it. Now, I don't know whether we'll get all this through. And this is what I put up on the website earlier in the week, and it's just phenomenal. It's just ridiculous. Maybe it might be a good idea to just flick through. So, what I'll do is I'll just check yous on if you've anything to say. Where are we? No, that's okay. You're all quiet. Jim Dritz, yeah, okay. Happy Camper for Psych says, Ashley Sinclair says Elon Musk offered her 40 million to stay silent about his 10,000 space lasers. Are these possible direct weapons? Yeah, absolutely they are. It's called Project Bluebeam. Now, involved in that are weapons, but also holographic systems, so they can move for this next shit show, this feigned alien invasion. But of course, for the way they're presenting it is that these aliens are hostile. So naturally, not only would they have to have the holograms, they'd have to have these lasers that come down and clearly show an explosion, a fire, something disintegrating. So this is why I started off tonight with the direct energy weapons now being deployed into the Gulf. Because they're always coming out, have we, don't we, blah, 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 never admitting to it. But because of the method employed by Iran with the swarm system, with the drones and also with the boats, it's been quite successful. Well, a military might like America can't have that. And so it's been forced to deploy the direct energy weapons. So now we can see that they're real. And that scared everybody to death because they're all talking about it. They're all on, oh my God, Iran can see that it's completely cocked it up. And you're backtracking and claiming that they've already pre-planned for this, but I don't think they have. They spent all their money on this swarm system. Now, whether China has done contrary to that and is prepared to offer it to Iran remains to be seen. But direct energy weapons now exist. So, I don't know who Ashley Sinclair is, but it wouldn't surprise me. Because the last thing they need is people to see that these lasers, this show that's going to come on with this alien invasion, is in fact the military-industrial complex. It is laser systems. It's all the satellites that have been putting up in the last 20 years. Project Bluebeam and other projects. It's not just Bluebeam, but Bluebeam does seem to umbrella the whole raft of this. And remember, when I was studying this way back in the day, the earliest talk I found of using a threat from the outside to bring the world together under the New World Order was in a speech in 1917. Of course, the other one was climate change, and that were pulled in and brought in by the alien contactee who said he spoke with the Pleiadians. I forgot his name offhand, and brought into the mix the idea of the ozone layer, if you remember. And of course, all the 80s peace movement jumped all over the ozone layer, and there commenced the fantasy of man-made climate change, albeit that they are actually spraying all over the shore and altering the climate in part for bits of time. So it really is ridiculous. Evening to you, Gaius. How are you doing? Hope you're well. Hope you're well, sir. Evening, Wayne. Hope you're well also. Right, so we've gone through the history of from Charles I to Charles II. We now understand what was actually going on before, during, and after the Civil War. Exactly the same format that they're playing today. It's just Muslims instead of German mercenaries. Okay? We need to get a grip of this. And English males need to get a grip and be prepared to say enough's enough. But saying enough's enough without this knowledge, it'll fall flat on its ass in a day. It has to be organised, it has to be done correctly. And the only way that can happen is if we understand the predicament that we're in. And that last thing we've just went through is it, in my opinion. We'll probably expand on it over time. But this kicker, so I'll paraphrase it through because we've got half an hour left. And I'll put it up under the video later. But so, as a short introduction to this paper, it is essential you understand that the House Rothschild is the trustee for the old money banking families and the fonde or fund pooled by the same over centuries of usury lending. It has been the means to the takeover of every nation, king and government since Venice became the root and the first mint was created. So see Rothschilds, but see the international financiers behind the mask for which the House Rothschild has worn so well since the 1700s. Okay, it's very important that people realise. And we've gone through the exploit system, we've gone through the control grid, the no-hide law. So this goes back to 1818, and a British expedition mapped the coastline of an island in the southern Shetlands, just off the Antarctic Peninsula, and it was named Rothschild Island. For 2 centuries, historians dismissed this as a minor geographic footnote, a wealthy banking family lending the name to a frozen rock in the most remote region on Earth. But what if that was not the whole story? For 2 centuries, what if the Rothschilds' name on that island was not honorary? What if the most powerful public dynasties in human history built something there that governments and central banks have spent the last 200 years keeping hidden? What nobody talks about is the fact that in 1818, the Rothschilds family controlled more wealth than most European nations. They financed wars, toppled governments, and created the modern central banking system. That same year, as the power reached its absolute peak, an island in Antarctica suddenly bears their name. To this day, Rothschild Island remains one of the most restricted territories on Antarctica. No research stations, no documented expeditions, no satellite imagery with any meaningful resolution, just a frozen landmass that supposedly holds nothing of value, yet remains completely off limits to everyone. The Rothschild banking dynasty did not just finance the Industrial Revolution, they engineered the global architecture that still controls how money moves across every border on the planet. And if you follow the paper trail of gold shipments, naval records and surpassed expedition logs from the early 1800s, a very different story starts to emerge about what they were really building on Antarctica. Nathan Mayer Rothschild arrived in London in 1798 with a vision his father's Frankfurt banking operation could not contain. He recognised that whoever controlled the flow of money between nations would control the nations themselves. By 1815, the Battle of Waterloo gave him that control. While the common story claims Nathan used insider information to profit from the stock market, the truth is way more dark than the cover story. His courier network delivered news of Napoleon's defeat a full day before the British government knew. In that window, Nathan bought British government debt at pennies on the pound. When the victory was confirmed, he owned leverage over the British Empire itself. The story went something like this. Nathan Rothschild was in London, but had made elaborate preparations to get the news either by special messenger or pigeon post. An additional twist was added. Once he knew Wellington had won, Rothschild was said to have deliberately provoked a collapse of the stock market by spreading false rumours of a defeat, so allowing him to pick up shares at rock-bottom prices and double his profits. Later, after official news of the victory had sent the markets soaring. The counter-story to this event is cited as a result of the story traced back to a pamphlet published under the name Satan, a pseudonym for the left-wing polemicist Georges Darneville, 1818 to 1854, it's suggested, which was widely printed and translated across Europe from 1846, and there's a link. However, what was a fact is that within 3 years from that event, the family controlled bond markets across Austria, Naples, France, and Prussia. 5 brothers in 5 capitals, moving money faster than any government could track. They were the invisible engine behind European politics, and 1818 was the year everything changed. It was the year that Rothschild transitioned from being wealthy bankers to becoming the architects of the modern financial system. Because in that year, they did not just lend money to governments, they started to build the infrastructure that would allow them to control what governments could do with money in the first instance. That same year, an island in the Antarctic was named after them. If you search on Google today for Bransfield's expedition, they mask this expedition with the claim. No official British government expedition was sent to the Antarctic in 1818. That year, the British Admiralty launched a massive naval push for the Arctic rather than the Antarctic, sending John Ross to seek the Northwest Passage and David Buchan towards the North Pole. And the British Antarctic Territory Government website obscures it by omission and affords its discovery to William Smith. The UN Antarctic timeline is found in that link. Smith was the captain and Bransfield was the master, and a clear obfuscation of the dating. So they obfuscated the dating. There's your link. The official explanation for Rothschild Island is very straightforward. British naval officer Edward Bransfield discovered and mapped the South Shetland Islands during an 1818 expedition. He named various features after patrons and notable figures of the time. So it's not available to us, but it is. There is an official explanation that's obviously probably in the archives that we can't find, and like we've looked at in the last couple of weeks. Rothschild Island was supposedly named to honour the banking family, they say, in the hope of future financial support for expeditions. That explanation works if you ignore three important facts, or rather inconvenient facts. First, Edward Bransfield's expedition logs from 1818 contain a 6-week gap from late November to early January. There are no recorded observations and no daily logs, so it's to January 1819. In fact, there is nothing. For a Royal Navy officer whose entire job was documentation, that is not just unusual, it is impossible under Admiralty regulations. So that can't happen. 6 weeks of nothing doesn't happen, so they've been removed. Second, the Rothschild family made an unusually large payment to the British Admiralty in early 1819. The payment was recorded in parliamentary finance records, but stated that the purpose was listed as survey and mapping services. Standard payments to the Admiralty for civilian map commissions were a few £100. The Rothschild payment was £40,000. That is roughly $8 million in today's money for a map. Third, Rothschild Island is not actually one island. Modern surveys have confirmed it is 2 distinct landmasses separated by a narrow channel. But every map from 1818 until 1957 showed it as a single island, which means either British cartographers were incompetent for 140 years or somebody intentionally obscured the true geography of the location. So what's really happening in Antarctica in 1818? To understand that, you have to look at what the Rothschild family was doing everywhere else. In 1817, Nathan Rothschild began coordinating with his brothers on a project they called the console system. Now, I checked for this. AI claims it doesn't exist. That's AI, isn't it? The goal was simple: create a unified bond market across Europe where government debt could be bought and sold like a commodity. This was revolutionary. So they've done what they've done in 1600s. Bank of England servicing the national debt. Parliament's now financed by the city. Then they wanted to do something with the debt itself. So they created a situation in the bond market so they could sell it. The debt again. Make more cash. Greed knows no bound with these Venetian families. Console was a name given to certain government debt issues in the form of perpetual bonds, redeemable at the option of the government. They were issued by the Bank of England and the US government. The first British consols were issued in 1751. Console bonds did have a maturity date but offered a fixed income to the bondholder and were seen as an equity type instrument, even though they were selling debt. Before the console system, if you lent money to France, then that loan stayed with France. You could not sell it. You could not trade it. You just waited and hoped France would pay you back. Nathan realised that if a debt could be traded, then debt itself could become a form of money. And whoever controlled the market where debt was traded would control the value of money itself. Isn't that what they're doing with the debt collection agencies? They're not selling the debt, they're selling the data. Console system. The console system required something that did not exist yet, a neutral localism, where contracts could be stored, verified and settled without interference from any single government. A place where gold reserves could be physically held as backing for the paper debt instruments being traded across Europe. The Rothschilds needed a vault, and not just any vault. It required a location so remote, so difficult to access, and so politically neutral that no government could seize it, no army could march on it, and no revolution could burn it down. They needed Antarctica. Here is where the paper trail gets very interesting. In 1816, 2 years before the Bransfield expedition, the Rothschild family quietly purchased 3 merchant vessels from a bankrupt Dutch shipping firm. These were not ordinary cargo ships, they were ice-reinforced whaling vessels designed for polar navigation. The ships were registered in a shell company in Hamburg. The purchase was buried in routine commercial shipping records, but if you cross-reference the crew manifest with later Royal Navy expeditions, you find the same names appearing on multiple Antarctic voyages between 1818 and 1823. Now we can see why they banned whaling. It's because most of it was done down there. Interesting. The Rothschild had their own, not that I were, pro-whaling, but the Rothschilds had their own private fleet going to Antarctica, and they were sending them repeatedly. What were they transporting? Gold. Huge, even staggering amounts of gold. In 1818, Europe was experiencing a gold shortage. Oh, yeah. The Napoleonic Wars had drained national treasuries. Spain colonial supplies from South America were being cut off by independence movements. The price of gold was spiking across every market. The Rothschild family was not buying gold during this shortage. They were moving it. Bills of lading from Hamburg and London show regular shipments of bullion leaving port, but the stated destinations were almost always survey and assessment operations. Nobody ships gold to assess minerals. You ship gold when you're building reserves, and if you were building a reserve system for an international bond market, you do not build it in London or Paris where governments can reach it. You build it where governments cannot reach it. You build it in the only place on earth with no sovereignty, no competing claims, and no legal jurisdiction. You build it in Antarctica, specifically on an island that carries your name. The logistics make sense when you think about it. Rothschild Island sits in Rideau Bay, which is one of the few natural deep harbours in the Antarctic Peninsula region. Ice-reinforced ships could anchor there even during winter months. The island itself has rocky outcrops and natural cave systems that can serve as storage. But storage alone does not explain the scale of what happened next. Between 1818 and 1825, something changed in global finance that historians still struggle to fully explain. It is called the Latin monetary crisis, although that name undersells what actually happened. In 1825, a series of bank failures steps through London. Dozens of banks collapsed in a matter of a week. The British pound, which had been the most stable currency in Europe, suddenly lost 30% of its value. Panic spread to Paris, Vienna, Naples, and by December of 1825, the entire European banking system was on the edge of total collapse. And then, inexplicably, it stabilized. The cause followed the collapse of the Spanish Empire. New Latin American states flooded the London market, issuing over 20 million in sovereign bonds between 1822 and 1825. British investors, blinded by high yields and the excitement of emerging markets, poured massive capital into South American mines. Within days, gold began flowing back into European markets, not from national treasuries, not from the new mining discoveries, just gold appearing in sufficient quantities to stop the panic. The source, bills of exchange drawn on Rothschild's accounts. But the gold backing those bills was not in London or Frankfurt. The physical reserves that stopped the 1825 crisis came from somewhere else. The Bank of England nearly exhausted its gold reserves, but was ultimately saved from collapse by an emergency infusion of gold from the Banque de France, suggesting the French branch of the family being the intermediary between Rothschild Island and the Bank of England. The outcome, systemic reforms, because the Panic of 1825 was recognised as the first modern economic cycle. Just remembering that France and England were under the Georges, the Hanoverian kings. So they were one and the same at power level. 1825 was recognised as the first modern economic cycle, which is driven by domestic credit and speculation rather than external war. It forced major regulatory changes. The Banking Acts of 1826 were passed, and the Bank of England officially began to develop its modern role as a lender of last resort. Parliamentary inquiries in 1826 tried to trace where the Rothschild had acquired the gold reserves that saved the European financial system. The family's answer was vague. They claimed it came from a diversified holdings and long-term strategic positioning. But there is a document kept in the Rothschild's archive in London that tells a different story. It is a shipping manifest from 1824. The ship was called the Endeavour III. The cargo was, and I can't find that ship. The cargo was listed as mining equipment and supplies for Antarctic operations. The ship left London in August 1824 and returned in March 1825, just months before the banking crisis. The return cargo saw no gold listed, just ballast materials and mineral samples. But the ship's draft, which is the measurement of how deep it sat in the water, was recorded by harbour officials in London and Cape Town on a project they called the Console System. When the Endeavour 3 left London, it drew 12 feet. When it returned, it drew 18 feet. That is the displacement with the ship carrying an additional 200 tons of cargo. 200 tons of gold is roughly $400 million worth at 1825 prices. At today's prices, that would be about $7 billion. You do not mine $7 billion worth of gold for equipment and supplies. You mine it from an existing operation that was already set up and running. An operation that had been built years earlier, an operation in Antarctica. Before we go further, let's address the obvious question. If the Rothschilds built a gold vault in Antarctica in 1818, why not just keep it in Switzerland, where banking secrecy was already established? The answer is jurisdiction. Nathan Rothschild understood that visible wealth creates political risk. European governments were already nervous about Rothschild power, with whispers of nationalising banks and seizing assets. But wealth that appears in account ledgers with no clear physical location is untouchable. If you are a government, you can seize a bank building in Paris, but you cannot seize what is held in Antarctica, a location that might as well have been on the moon back in 1818. By building reserves, the Rothschilds created money that existed outside any jurisdiction. They could issue bonds backed by gold that physically sat where no government had control in a legal format. And because no one could verify that the gold was there, the Rothschilds controlled the narrative about how much backing their instruments had. This is the foundation of modern central banking. Money backed by, not by gold, you can see, but by a promise of gold that exists somewhere. The Rothschilds did not pioneer this system. They built the literal infrastructure for it, in Antarctica, on an island that still bears their name. In 1830, something happened that changed everything. The July Revolution swept through France. King Charles X was overthrown. The new government, led by Louis Philippe, immediately moved to audit all foreign financial holdings and contracts tied to the previous regime. There's a couple of links. The Rothschild family had extensive contracts with Charles X. The new government wanted to know where all the collateral for those contracts was physically located. They demanded access to Rothschild vaults, ledgers, and everything. James Rothschild, the brother operating in Paris, gave them access to the Paris vaults. He showed them the Frankfurt reserves. He opened the books in London. Each time, the French auditors found that the gold backing French government bonds was recorded as held in a remote strategic reserve. James would smile and say the physical gold was being held in a location protected by the British Naval Authority under international maritime law. The French government demanded specifics. James gave them coordinates. Coordinates in Antarctica, Rothschild Island. What was France going to do? Send an expedition to Antarctica to verify. In 1830, that would take 2 years and cost a small fortune, and by the time they got there and back, the political situation would have changed completely. The French government backed down and accepted the Rothschild accounting because it meant challenging the entire system of international finance that every European government now depended on. That moment in 1830 was when the Rothschilds stopped being bankers and became the system itself. And yet again, here's where the story takes another dark turn. In 1838, the United States launched the Wilkes expedition, the largest exploration effort undertaken than any other nation to that point. 6 ships and 400 men, 4 years of planned exploration and mapping. The official purpose was scientific research and mapping of the Antarctic coast, but the expedition's private orders, which were not declassified until 1934, included specific instructions to investigate foreign installations or claims of territorial development in Antarctic regions. The Wilkes expedition carried out extensive surveying of the Antarctic Peninsula and the South Shetland Islands, but there is a strange gap in their reports. Rothschild Island is mentioned once in the official log. The entry reads, "Island surveyed from a distance, no landing attempted due to ice conditions," but another document, a personal journal kept by one of the expedition junior officers, tells a different story. That journal entry from February 1839 describes seeing structures on Rothschild Island, stone buildings and excavations visible from the ship even at a distance. The officer noted it seemed unusual for a supposedly uninhabited location. That journal entry was purchased by a private collector in 1927. It has never been displayed publicly. When the Wilkes expedition returned to the United States in 1842, Congress held hearings about the expedition's findings. During those hearings, Lieutenant Charles Wilkes was asked directly when there any evidence of foreign occupation and development had been found in Antarctica. He answered, "Nothing of significance." When pressed by a congressman from New York about rumours of structures or installations, Wilkes replied, "The Antarctic is a land of ice and illusion. The ice see many things that are not there." 3 months after that testimony, the Rothschild family extended a substantial line of credit to the United States Treasury to help finance infrastructure projects, and that credit was offered at unusually favourable terms. The congressman from New York, who had been asking questions about Antarctica, withdrew his inquiry. The pattern repeats across the 19th century any time government or expedition showed interest in Rothschild Island. Specifically, financial pressure or political complications would emerge. Funding would dry up, permits would be delayed, ships would be reassigned, and when expeditions did reach the area, their findings about Rothschild Island were always minimal. Ice prevented landing, weather closed in, or equipment failed. Every single time. In 1933, something changed. The British government, under pressure from economic collapse during the Great Depression, began considering nationalising gold reserves held by private banking families. 6 weeks later, the Antarctic Treaty preliminary framework was quietly drafted. Okay, now we're getting on. A predecessor to the 1959 treaty negotiated in secret among Britain and France and the United States. So they could see this coming. So under the treaty, no military activities permitted, no resource extraction and no permanent structures. But Rothschild Island carried an additional designation of special protected area, meaning even scientific research required approval from multiple signatory nations. So now they spread it out across all the nations. Not only that, protecting Rothschild Island, every nation's navy is involved. So they're not even paying for it themselves. These guys have got it. These guys are just off the wall smart. Darkly, but hell, they're smart cookies. So then it's just more data about showing that, you can't do it. And I think it's pertinent to suggest that Rothschild Island and the means to protect its secret gave birth to the land grab they call environmental protection, which we've discussed with National Trust. Claiming land and ancient architecture and placing it into trust. UNESCO is the greatest machine in claiming global heritage and therefore controlling history. UNESCO is a branch of the World Bankruptcy Administrative Executive of the United Nations, the governing body of bankrupt governments on behalf of the real money power, the Bank for International Settlements. And then there were another one in 2004. Again, one of the crew who, when you look into it, she's a she. But when I started reading stuff on the Antarctic Treaty stuff, first he was saying it were a he, that's an obfuscation. And then at the end, it said she. So the whole, everything around, when you investigate these bits for yourself, it's just smoke and mirrors everywhere. And she made it clear that there were structures there still being used, there were electricity going on, it were all good and shit. Lost her funding, out she went, blah, blah, blah. And her interview that she made has never been heard of. Again, I'd love to actually contact her and get her to give me an interview, to be honest. So that's basically just more data about how it's been hidden. Now it says gold storage is one answer, but gold does not require elaborate, I'm going to have to go back through these, I've rushed them. Elaborate underground chambers. You can store gold in reinforced shipping containers unless you're storing something more valuable than gold. Documents. The Rothschilds accumulated something more valuable than gold over the centuries. Information, contracts, record of who owed what to whom, the original agreements that formed the foundation of the modern financial system. If those documents were destroyed in a revolution or seized by government, then the entire architecture of international debt collapses. Bondholders could claim they never borrowed, lenders could forge records, chaos would ensue. But if those original documents exist somewhere and no one can reach them, then the Rothschild family holds the ultimate leverage. They hold proof of what is real. Consider it in these terms. Every major financial crisis, every debt renegotiation, every international dispute about who holds what, it comes back to one question. What do the original contracts say and who holds the originals? Not copies, not certified duplicates, the actual signed documents that establish the first international bonds, the first centrals and agreements, the first debt instruments that modern finance is built upon. If you are a Rothschild family, you do not keep them in a bank vault in London where a fire or revolution could destroy them. You keep them on Antarctica, in the most secure, most remote and unreachable location on Earth. Now, this explains something that puzzled financial stories for decades. How did the Rothschild family maintain influence, even as their visible wealth appeared to decline in the 20th century? So that's just a bit more data. But let's just get to the crutch of it, really, because I've said salvation is on Rothschild Island. Even a crypto guy in 2016 went and then got attacked off it. Now, here we go. Here's worth reading. The financial architecture they created, the system of international debt, central banking that controls the flow of money across every border, still relies on the foundation they laid in Antarctica 2 centuries ago. That foundation cannot be revealed because if the world saw the original documents, the original contracts, the actual agreements that created the debt system, the modern civilization runs on, the questions would be asked. Agreements would be set against modern-day definitions of what makes a contract void and valid, and what makes a contract void. This would question legitimacy of debts accrued over centuries to be valid against the people who had nothing to do with any form of agreements made in desperate times to secure stolen gold, stolen futures, and they demand the world act under nothing but promise. It would expose who owns what, whether the global financial system is built on agreements that were never meant to be public. The Rothschild family does not need to be the richest anymore. They just need to be the keepers of the records, the holders of the proof of their power, the guardians of the original agreements that give legitimacy to trillions in debt obligations. And they keep those records with no government, which means the people can touch them. In fact, the only time governments can see the record, where are we? Is when the Rothschilds are proving a debt obligation for which you, the people, now turn into persons, soon to be shipped into digital identities, will be the holder of the liabilities the government and crown owes to this family by a deception so dark the veil cannot ever be allowed to be lifted. No fire of revolution, no freedom of information request can touch them. You are the secured debtor for a debt you cannot see, cannot ever be held by law, but in the world of fictional statutes, parading as law, you pay and will continue to pay until the island itself is blown to pieces. Then the proof of claim is gone. The lie that binds mankind is protected by international treaty, paid for by central banks, monitored by nations as a protocol of borrowing from central banks. If Rothschild Island was only an empty rock, what reason outside the fiction of environmental fantasy could they possibly conjure to deny permits, degrade satellite imagery? No reason to intercept private expeditions 70 miles from the shore. The very fact you cannot visit Rothschild Island is the proof itself that for the House Rothschild, something on that island has to be protected at all costs from the eye and the ear of the global population. The Rothschilds, as the trustees for the Venetian banking families, know well. Power is not about how much wealth you have. It's about controlling what others believe about wealth, about debt, about who owes what to whom, and that control requires one thing above all else: secrecy. The kind of secrecy you maintain in the most remote location on earth. The Rothschilds built that secrecy in 1818, and it still stands as operational today, under the ice, on an island you cannot see or visit, holding the very salvation of man out of the reach of man. The Rothschilds have played a blinder in our relations to secure territory on Antarctica. The burden of cost and manpower has been divided as an obligation upon all nations to guard the secret records with their own naval fleets. And yet, if man only awakened for a second, everything we need to remove the yoke could be turned in an instant by the very vessels tasked to protect the lie. If we landed on Rothschild Island and began the deconstruction of the greatest spell ever cast on man, a direct result of allowing kings to reign and take part in usury, never did they tell you that when a king borrows money, it is you that will have to pay. Today, the Rothschilds' role as trustees for the Fondy sees them moving out of public investment and moving into the private through the purchase of the infrastructure upon which the new digital extravaganza will depend. Because they're moving out of the public now and into the private at a massive pace. And that, ladies and gentlemen, ends tonight. I'm glad we got both out, really, because they both work together. Where are we? Heavyweight presentation tonight, and the truth folk need to get up to speed and accept the absolute fact. This is the truth of the history of the land England. And to mine, 100% accurate. It is, absolutely, that is it. This is the way it is. There's no bullshit in there whatsoever. And are we not facing the same situation now? Fucking right we were. They're not German mercenaries that they brought here now. They're not fucking Muslims. UN tasked soldiers. A lot of what you covered is recorded in the book Documents of the Puritan Revolution and alluded to on Charles I's murder and subsequent undoing of the constitutional monarchy in Hansard's debates. Thanks, Anthony. Quotation from Hansard's debate: when we here in Parliament murdered a divinely anointed king and chased out his son, We here in Parliament became sovereign, and the book confirms the city position. All the then acts written transferring all the rights and privileges held by the constitutional monarchy over the city, who in turn created the Parliament, who would become subservient to the City of London up to the present time. My limited input, just to clarify what Sean has presented from our data sources other than those presented, and in support of what Sean said in regards to suppressing those who present a true account. Thanks for that, Anthony. Well, chaps, thanks for joining, even though it's been a great and sunny day. I didn't expect many to come, but hopefully people will pick this up and give it some serious study and some serious thought, because we're already in the same position as then, and now we can see what kind of games they play and are playing. It's time we started to think, but more importantly, move to follow that with real solid action. We are England, and they don't want it. And on that note, ladies and gentlemen, I shall say thanks for joining, thanks for taking part, mods, thanks for modding. I hope you have a great week. It's supposed to be lovely and sunshining all the week, and you might get a suntan. And on that note, ladies and gentlemen, I shall say till the next time.
electronic engineering.